Macrix has been married to Cindy for quite some time now. It had been almost 7 years since their marriage. They had known each other for about 11 years already. The couple had a beautiful, but a little more prosaic, and even somewhat boring story of acquaintance. The fact is that they were brought together by mutual friends in the same company. Outsiders, it would seem, people immediately guessed that these young people fit each other just perfectly. They were like two halves of one whole. As soon as the young people met and had their first conversation, all doubts and distrust of this way of acquaintance immediately fell away. Cindy did not believe in marriage or love until she met Max, who became the one and only for her. Before him, it was as if there were no meetings and acquaintances in her life. Max, unlike his future wife, was not so categorical and pessimistic. But when he met her, he too realized that this was his soulmate. It was an exact and instant coincidence. At this point, their relationship with each other could be watched and admired from the outside. So tender, so loving, so young. You don't see that very often. And it was especially pleasant that the feelings were not at all played, not fictitious. Everything was organic and very natural. Even the most cynical people would not quip and try to exercise in wit and looking at them. No, such a union was an exception, something incredible and very fragile. The last pessimists and unbeliever Dapedown dreamed of such feelings, such a relationship. And it was real tactile proof that it happens. Yes, it doesn't for everyone. But the fact that it exists here, on our sinful earth, is already a reason to live and hope, to believe that maybe you too will be lucky someday. Max and Cindy didn't take what they were given for granted either. These feelings, this love, as a matter of course. No. They guarded their happiness and treasured it. On the initiative of the more pragmatic, calculating Cindy, the couple made a joint decision not to rush into things. At first, they met for quite a long time, looking at each other. After a while, they moved in together to live together. But to meet from time to time is one thing, but to live together permanently is quite another. It's two big differences, and they couldn't ignore it. When and at this stage, there were no problems and significant disagreements on the future, plans and differences in views on the future life. The couple finally applied to the registry office. 3 years were allotted to check feelings well, to make sure that it is not passion, but true love. They tested each other so that it does not turn out that they tied their lives with a complete stranger. Very commendable, responsible approach when there was no doubt left. The lovers began to plan a lavish wedding from their dreams. For now, both were now absolutely sure that this marriage would be the first and only for them. Now it was possible to invest in money, soul, knowing that the holiday will not turn out to be a nightmare and will not become only a bitter reminder after several years of married life. After the divorce, both Max and Cindy, with great diligence and desire, approached the choice of every detail for the future celebration. Their attention was not spared neither such essential things as the wedding dress, rings, and restaurant, nor such trifles as even the invitation and decoration of their hall. Everything was organized and passed at the highest level thanks to the efforts of the newlyweds. Finally, having passed a long, thorny path of lapping and rapprochement, they became husband and wife. At first, it was unbelievable that it really happened. Max was ready to marry Cindy in the first week. He never doubted that she was his soulmate. Things were much more complicated for the thoughtful, serious girl. She loved the young man very much, but she did not want to make thoughtless mistakes. Now, when all the difficulties, as they hoped, were behind them, ahead of a long, happy family life, it was necessary to think about other and global plans. Of course, first of all, the newlyweds decided to settle the family nest, to combine the capital, to take the necessary amount of money in the mortgage and buy their own home. Then, A grandiose repair under themselves, under their taste and their parameters took place. The engine of such a progressive plan and its unhurried realization was, of course, Cindy. The girl from a dysfunctional family had not fully left her past and former habits behind. Her life, according to her plan, should have been thorough and reliable, without surprises and spontaneous foolishness. But we only assume, and God disposes. Our control, or rather its visibility, is a flop. Of course, everything and always at any second can go wrong. Confidence in the future is pure fiction. Nevertheless, as long as everything worked out for Cindy, she made a plan, developed its realization into stages, and followed the planned path step by step until nothing threw her off the path when the new family apartment was equipped and renovated. The next plan was, of course, planning a baby, back when the couple had just started dating. The girl had immediately indicated that she wanted a family and a few kids. It was a prerequisite for her existence. Max also did not think his life otherwise, and agreed with the Sora girl without doubt and hesitation. Unfortunately, it was at this important and serious stage that everything went wrong. At first, the couple tried to conceive a baby naturally and did not turn to specialists. That is, the minimum necessary tests were taken, and that was it. According to them, Cindy and Max were healthy, and no obvious health problems were found. But the pregnancy was still not coming. Each new month brought more and more sadness and frustration, not only for the young woman, but also for her husband. They longed for a child and wanted very much to be good parents for him. But the dream was in no hurry to come true. So passed more than a year of fruitless attempts, and no results. The doctor at the regular women's clinic could not understand the reasons. All she said was that things don't work out in a snap nowadays. You have to believe and try again and again. This approach was rejected by the couple when they were already in their second year of trying. They had to turn to more specialized specialists. They wanted to find the cause and try to fix things, make things right. But no. Even conducting special tests and deeper research did not give any results. There was no diagnosis and no answers to the couple's questions from the doctors. Professors, doctors of science, recognized authorities in their field only just waved their hands. No problems were found neither at Cindy nor at Max. Such conclusions made several doctors happy. And sad or both. If everything is fine, then why is the pregnancy still not coming? Cindy was getting bigger by the day. She is not used to efforts going to waste. The girl is used to plow and work to make things work out and realize properly. But to have all the effort go to nothing like this. Cindy was not ready for that. Max himself was upset, and watching the reaction of his wife, he could not find a place for himself. In the end, he could not stand the first, and hesitantly began a conversation with his wife, Baby. Maybe we can go to the capital. I read on the internet, put on different sites and forums. They say that there are many different clinics there that deal with similar problems. Maybe they can help us too? I doubt that Cindy could do anything to encourage her and give her inner strength. How's that for a suggestion? She herself had thought many times that she should go to some regional center. The capital city was out of the question. You know, I cheered my wife with joy. Unfortunately, it was not possible to go right away. At first, Cindy herself was not feeling well. The ailment was blamed on a cold, then on Max. There was a lot of things to do at work. Everything seemed to be against them. Cindy became discouraged again when her husband, unable to bear it, put an iron fist on the matter. So no excuses. We're flying next month. It's a flood. You'll have a party assignment. Take care of logistics, tickets, and everything necessary for the... Such an approach of the wife incredibly impressed. She worked like a bee, negotiating and organizing the trip. It was necessary to plan and take care of a lot of things while they were still here, so that in Moscow they would not be left at a broken trough. Still, their visit was rather short-term in terms of time. Both spouses had a lot of work, things to do, which could not be left for a long time, and it turned out, in fact, that even paid appointments are not always free for appointment. The most desirable to visit a specialist in reproduction, for example, kept a record as long as 6 months in advance. So the case was a carload and a small cart. When the couple planned the trip, they hoped, of course, that they would be helped. They made assumptions and hopes based on the fact that the problem would be spit and easily solved. In the back of her mind, Cindy had already had terrible suspicions about her own health, but she preferred not to share them with anyone. Not even Max, afraid of frightening the man before his time. What if it all turned out all right? And these were just silly female fancies and hunches based on nothing. Unfortunately, it didn't. The first reproduction to which the couple was enrolled, having looked at the previously passed tests, and the woman herself directed her to additional studies. And their set of the knock was completely different from what is usually prescribed to potential moms.
Cindy suspected as much. Only her husband remained in happy ignorance and still reassured the woman he loved. Do you see how many additional appointments he's made? Probably he realized where the dog is buried, and he just wants to make sure. Do not worry, baby. Everything will be fine. The young woman was most afraid that the doctor was not mistaken, and correctly guessed at once about the cause of her infertility. She felt a cold sweat of horror, but she courageously and humbly accepted her fate. She made the difficult decision that she would never tell her husband about her guesses.
No, let the doctor make the diagnoses, she reasoned rightly. From the point of view of formal logic, this was correct. But emotionally, even Cindy herself would be easier if her husband knew about her hunches and supported her. And he, being in happy ignorance, not so much did not help, but irritated and without strength with his constant optimism and faith in the best. But there could be no complaint against him. He piously believed that it would be so, that just a little more and they, happy, would go home, and in 9 months they would be the happy parents of a healthy baby. That's why he was so affected by the doctor's verdict. For Max, the diagnosis was a thunderclap. Cindy had long been able to prepare herself and had been waiting for this as an imminent execution. Doctor or product. According to the results of all the doctor's manipulations, silently brought the couple to the office of the doctor-oncologist, and the latter explained to them in a sympathetic voice that Cindy was found to have a malignant tumor in the breast. Since this type of cancer is hormonal in nature, the tumor was preventing the natural conception of the baby. To say Max was terrified is an understatement. He felt like he'd been thrown off a cliff. Just half an hour ago, he had no doubts about success, that everything would work out. And then it was inconceivably impossible to imagine the grief that immediately came upon him with all its force and weight. Cindy, on the other hand, was an example of true courage. During the announcement of the final diagnosis, not a single muscle on her face did not tremble. And the tears and hysterics that usually accompany such news were out of the question. The young woman was calm and cold-blooded, like a soldier. She had only one question in her position, uttered in an even and calm voice. What should she do now? It seemed that even the doctor was surprised at this approach and such unprecedented courage and fortitude of a beautiful and blossoming young woman. He even asked me again, "Did you understand me well? This malignant tumor is your 3rd stage of breast cancer." "I understand perfectly well," Cindy replied calmly. "My question remains the same. What do I do about it now?" Of course, the doctor could not offer any miracles or magic. It was simple and rigid. It had to be treated immediately, and that there were no other options. First surgery, then chemotherapy, radiotherapy, or radiation therapy. All on the indications of the oncologist at the place of registration. Having recovered from the first shock, Max tried to find other options, or he really did not want to return to his hometown. He hoped that the capital would have more opportunities for a complete cure and remission of the disease of his wife. But Cindy insisted on doing the exact opposite. "No, I want to go home, to be able to be in our apartment with you once in a while." "No, not mine. I'm having the last happy moments of my life." "Stop talking nonsense. You have your whole life ahead of you." My husband was angry, although deep down he assumed that such an outcome is also possible. And it is also necessary to be ready for it. But he did not want to show his sick wife under any circumstances. No matter how hard it was, no matter what critical moment did not come, he will be with his beloved to the end, and in sorrow and in joy, and will support and care for her. In any case, to argue with his wife, who was facing a serious test, Max considered it inexpedient. If she thought that the walls at home helped, so be it. Although he himself thought that it was better to start treatment here in Moscow. His spouse's fears were not in vain. In their hometown, they had no problem providing free qualified medical care. But the scope and opportunities were not the same. For example, due to the busy surgeons, the operation was scheduled only in a month and a half. Max was already resentful, but Cindy treated everyone with understanding and proper patience, as if it did not directly affect her life and death. And the issue wasn't as pressing. After the operation, the chemotherapy prescribed by the oncologist was also constantly postponed. There were interruptions in the delivery of medicines or some other overlaps. The exhausted, tired woman agreed with everything and was not like herself. She did not even try to defend her rights and legitimate interests. Max couldn't stand it and took the airplane tickets without any unnecessary talk. There was no discussion of arguments for or against. He could no longer look at the suffering of his beloved and wanted to help her, no matter what it cost, no matter what he had to face and who he had to fight with for it. Even with herself. Upon Max's arrival, leaving his wife at the hotel, he immediately ran to the hospital. Wanted to make his way to the doctor who had first diagnosed her. It wasn't easy to do that. The doctor had a busy schedule. But the road will take one who walks. Max realized that there was no other choice. We had to act quickly. Unfortunately, having had a quick look at the current state of affairs, judging by the medical records, Cindy had nothing to be happy about. Additional procedures were scheduled at the center. Cindy was hospitalized, and that's it for now. Updates on how the disease was behaving were needed for diagnosis and prognosis. The news and conclusions were disappointing. A whole medical concilium was assembled, which, after studying all the medical materials presented to them, came to the unequivocal conclusion that the tumor had expanded and was no longer operative. Alternative treatment is also unlikely to help. Of course, it will bring success in the sense of prolonging the life of the unfortunate patient. But what kind of life will it be? The probability of a favorable outcome varied so gracefully. Cindy's chance of life is no more than 1 in 1,000,000, which is effectively 0. That's it. It's over. No more options or chances of salvation. No more hope for a better hope, for a miracle of miracles. It was hardly possible to come to terms with it. The human brain is so organized that it doesn't understand the word end. He is always looking for some options, opportunities, even when he realizes the insignificance of the chance the chance and the meaninglessness of this activity. Worse, the presiding medical concilium took the patient's spouse aside and correctly tried to convey to him the idea that there were no chances at all, and that he should hold on, that Cindy needed him, There's a good chance she'll be gone in a matter of months. The only option now was anesthesia, to ensure a less painful and more peaceful exit. For Max, it was a death sentence. Not even for his wife or himself. He began to lord and die with her, to bury himself alive. His mind was full of thoughts, those utopian, which fed the hope that his beloved woman could recover and live on to more down-to-earth and selfish ones. How would he then live without her? That was something he couldn't imagine in a horrible dream. Everything had been so wonderful. Why? Why such sorrow? Why were they given so little time for happiness? Cindy, after learning of the doctor's prognosis and conclusions, remained calm again. She had already accepted her imminent death and was not expecting a miracle. The only thing that tormented her, and very much, and that she said several times to her husband, "I really regret that God did not give me the opportunity to give birth to your baby, to leave something behind on this planet. Imagine, and you would have a wonderful little boy or a pretty little girl." These words brought tears to the eyes of a normally calm and unsentimental man. Who could judge that? His wife? The woman of his life was dying in his arms, and he was powerless, could do nothing. Her unfulfilled dreams broke his heart. Finally, Max would do everything, would give his life, just so that she lived. Unfortunately, nature doesn't provide for such an exchange. It's a pity. A lot of people would have liked it. Max certainly wouldn't hesitate for a second. And Cindy would have given her life for her husband's, without a shadow of a doubt. The couple returned to their hometown in a terrible state, both mentally and physically. It would seem that it should have been many times worse for Cindy. But no, Max was dying, it seemed, faster than she was. He turned himself on, tried to find some alternative treatment options, and, of course, ran into a wall everywhere. But not to fight, to give up. He simply could not afford it. As for the young woman, she was literally dying in front of her helpless husband. He could not help her, and this depressed him even more. Cindy was getting worse and worse. Every day, Max noticed new symptoms, new signs of deterioration, the progression of the disease. His steadfast wife had never even complained about the pains that obviously haunted her. Now, every minute of her life, she was thinking that her days were numbered. There was no more help for her. Cindy's task was to teach her husband to live alone without her. No regrets, no grief, no guilt. The goal was certain to fail. Impossible, of course. Max loved his wife more than anything in the world. But it was definitely worth a try. At least a little to ease his suffering in the future when she was gone. Even here, in such a state, the young woman did not change herself and refused to put herself first, despite the life situation she found herself in, despite the pain and even a soon agonizing death. This is how spouses existed. Each tried to pull the blanket from themselves to the other, and vice versa. Both one and the other made attempts to surround the other with care and love. That was probably the secret of their relationship over the years: concentration on the partner, the loved one, and a reasonable disconnection, self-centeredness. Time could not stretch forever. Upon returning to the Rhine-T for Han year, which are their hometown, the couple lived at home and Cindy only had outpatient treatment. After another visit, the doctor called the husband and said, "Mind you, your wife refuses to be hospitalized flatly. But, in my opinion, it is vital for her." While driving, Max kept silent and only looked at his wife with a sidelong glance. "She finally just couldn't bear to complain about me." "What did you think? They tell you it's necessary." Max instantly became agitated. "For what? To prolong my agony?" Cindy parried. "To give you a chance. It's tiny, very tiny, and you intend to deprive yourself of even him?" Of course, he himself had little faith in what he was saying. But there was still hope for the best, despite the arguments of reason and objective reasons. At least you stop deceiving me, Max. There is no chance, and you know it as well as I do. I don't want to spend the last weeks and days of my life not at home. I don't want this horrible environment. To which the husband saved the most decisive, the most weighty argument for Cindy. How am I supposed to live with the realization that we didn't even try? Yes, it was a low blow. But there were no other arguments that would have had any effect. The only thing his wife was still protecting was him. So you have to play on that. It's a no-no. She could barely find it. No, my dear, it's the truth of life. We have to take every possible and impossible chance and try everything. We need time. Only round-the-clock medical care and supervision can buy it. The woman didn't have the strength to resist, so she had to give up. Although she would never willingly agree to Max. She didn't want to upset and distress him, didn't want to cause him any unnecessary worry. As it was, she was causing too much trouble and hassle. True, Cindy still asked her husband to make some concessions. For example, bargained himself another week at liberty, as she put it. It was late. Spring outside was very beautiful, iridescent, and smelled of lilacs. So the woman insisted that she wanted to take a little walk and enjoy life one last time before she was locked up. Of course, Max resented this approach to the matter, and vehemently denied that his wife would never leave the walls of the hospital again. He wanted to believe in this lie himself, but it was difficult to do so. He could not contradict his wife and, of course, fulfilled her last request. As she called it, he took a week of vacation, and they were together around the clock enjoying each other, nature, and the last days that they were given. In the back of their minds, they were both sure that they were. Cindy emphasized it. Max tried to tone down the rhetoric and disagreed. He took the position that things could still change. Was it possible to do otherwise? Unfortunately, upon admission to the hospital, the head of the department confirmed Cindy's assumption. He bluntly told Max in private to prepare for the worst. Cindy's not getting out of here anytime soon. I'm sorry, as hard and painful as it is to hear. Max didn't give any sign for his wife. He continued to make jokes, and in other ways he could, to raise his wife's spirits and morale. And so day after day it went on and on. From the moment Cindy was hospitalized, it had been nearly 2 months. Max's wife has been getting a little better, a little worse. No acute crisis, thankfully. But there was no joy in that, nor optimism. Yes, there was no deterioration, but there was no improvement either. Cindy had lost all hope for the future Schurterser. That's understandable. Constant observation, contact with people who are dying before your eyes, daily deaths of someone you used to chat with, joke with. Plus, in order to stabilize her condition and believe in the best, the patient underwent one more additional operation. The attending physician deemed it necessary to try to at least slightly reduce the size of the tumor, to help the body to give it a chance to still fight. It was unlikely to save her, but it would prolong her life somewhat. Yes, now that it was done, the woman was no longer able to get up from her hospital bed. She was in IV tubes and connected to a lot of machines. Cindy was so hard-pressed to agree to one more intervention. And now, in general, every visit from her husband allowed stigmatized both herself and him for that choice. And now what? I can't even go to the window. What is this life for? She asked her husband round. Questions to which he, of course, could not answer. Max and himself did not know whether they did the right thing. Listening to the escalopists, maybe the decision was made hastily, on emotion. They were simply grasping for a belief in a miracle. The questions were rhetorical. History doesn't suffer from the subjunctive mood. What's done, done is done. Though it was unbearably painful to see his wife suffer. no matter how Max tried to abstract himself from the fact that nothing could be changed, and it was pointless to regret, he still tormented himself inside. He saw his favorite woman, his Cindy, dying, how she was in agony every day, every hour, every minute of her life. Seeing her suffering was simply unbearable. After several weeks had passed since the surgery, and there had been no improvement, Cindy had given up altogether. Her despair was overwhelming. To Max's horror, every visit, she begged her husband to finally do something so that she would pass away. She begged him to ease her suffering, coaxing her, telling her that she just didn't have the strength left to endure it all. Every minute of this goddamn life is torturing me. You understand, I'm in agony, and I'm not living. Max. She didn't need to be told. He had known this woman for so many years that he could see the full extent of the disaster in her gaze. She was in unbearable pain every second. Painkillers were categorically not helping. Like any normal person, at first Max was simply taken aback by such a request, although it was even more like a demand. Are you crazy? Do you want me to kill you with my own hands? He shouted at his wife almost for the first time in his life. The man's emotions were off the charts. In civilized countries, it's called euthanasia. And in ours, murder. How can I do that? You're my nearest and dearest, Cindy. That's why I'm asking you. You're the only one who can understand me. I just can't do it anymore. I've run out of strength. These conversations used to happen. Every visit to his wife now. They didn't differ in content in general, only in details. And sometimes Cindy resorted to more cunning and pressure, sometimes less. At first, Max couldn't even conceive of such a scenario. He was finding that his wife was just starting to move around a bit in mental status. But water sharpens stone. Utataran stone. Every day, without interruption, he listened and listened to his wife, and her arguments and reasoning. And each day, the acceptance came more and more. Of course, all this did not happen in a day, or even a week. When you see your wife in this state, she begs you for it. That's something for everyone to think about. In some ways, Cindy was unequivocally right. Her life was indeed directly dependent on the pile of tubes and machines she was hooked up to. Is that a life? Probably yes. There was some truth in what she said. But Max loved his wife very much. He didn't want to let her go, as long as there was even a microscopic chance of saving her. Come on, to hell with the future. Here and now they have this moment. How could they not cherish it? How could they willingly give it up? Interrupt it selfishly? Perhaps so, but there was nothing Max could do about it. He saw the world that way, and no other way. It was terribly difficult for Max to get used to the idea of being alone without her, and the thought that he would have to help her pass away, to do it with his own hands. No, that would be too much. He wanted her to live, no matter what. As much as the Lord had measured out, he would take all of it. That's how he answered his wife in response to her speeches, to which she only emphasized how self-centered her husband acts, how he doesn't consider her and doesn't see beyond his own nose. How can you do this, Max? She tried to shout, although there was no more strength left in the sick body to shout or even talk loudly. You love me. I know you do. But so look at me. Stand on my side, standing up for my interests too. Think about what is important to me. What I need like air. I usually didn't have the energy to argue for long. The conversation just stopped, and that was it. In general, Max's life had become a living hell lately. Not only that, despite all that he was going through and living with Cindy, he had to work. It was no place to lose his only source of income now. He had to support his household, his spouse's treatment, pay for extras like a caregiver, and medications that weren't provided for free by the state. After work, he ran straight to the hospital to his beloved. There was no other way and could not be otherwise. he was obliged to be near her. Moreover, he was completely sleep-deprived. He'd never had insomnia before. Max had never experienced it before, and it turned out to be very scary. You dream all day about resting, sleeping, dreaming, and then you see to the bed in a semi-fog and the active phase of wakefulness begins. There is no even hope of sleep. You lie there, and nothing happens. Sleep doesn't come, and only disturbing thoughts roll in, which, by the way, he had plenty of during the day. Literally nothing worked. What did Max try? All the methods that were found on the internet were tried personally, by experience. Nothing worked. He wouldn't go to sleep. Max would sleep for 20-30 minutes at a time. Oh, it was enough not to go completely insane, but it was too little for the normal activity. The need even forced me to go to the doctor to prescribe sleeping pills. The pills didn't do much to improve the situation. There was sleep, but what kind of sleep? Now every night, when the poor exhausted man finally fell asleep, as he drank sleeping pills, he began to have nightmares. Here you do not even know what is better horror movies world, or in comparison with what every night saw Max in his head, it was indescribably scary to fall asleep and scary to wake up. What to do about it? How to cope? Not even to complain. Not even to seek sympathy. Where's he going to complain? To whose? His dying wife. It's unbelievably stupid. All his problems are silly compared to the magnitude of hers. Ugh! Along with the nightmares in Max's dreams came a recurring character. Not every night, but from time to time a strange woman appeared in his dreams. By all external attributes, it was possible to conclude that she was a gypsy, young and very beautiful. Each time, appearing to him in a dream, she said something to Max, told him, forced him. But as he didn't remember any details in the morning, he could not remember anything, letting him into the halls at the last minute. At the last second, it seemed like he was about to remember. Oh, but every time it was a monkey's labor. That made it even more frustrating. What if there was something important in there? Prophetic, but hypothetically possible, right? All right. And once again, he sighed sadly and humbly, and tried to forget, so as not to be upset again afterwards. In general, to be honest, at least with himself, Max could barely hold it together. It had been hard on him mentally before. Now he was dying physically as well. There's a Chinese torture called sleep deprivation. That's what was happening to the young man. Only this boycott and torture was organized by his own body. He lived each new day solely on moral willpower, just because he had to try for Cindy. He could not leave her. To be frank, he wanted to die himself. Everything was piling up so much that it was unbearable. All sides at once. Nothing felt sorry for the man. Probably it was this state, this decline of strength and nervous system, and provoked a complete breakdown of the man. What had previously been impossible, unthinkable for him, no longer seemed so terrible and horrible. Finally, such entreaties of Cindy succeeded. Almost 4 months in the hospital, several months of persuasion, and then her spouse gave in. She broke him. It happened unexpectedly, even for the woman herself when Max arrived. As usual, in the evening, as on any given day, she again struck up a conversation with him about euthanasia, as she herself called the act. He sat next to her on the chair next to her cat and seemed not even to hear her quiet monologue. He just stared sullenly in front of him, down at the floor. From the outside, it looked as if he'd even passed out. Finishing her previous arguments, Cindy summarized with the question, "What do you think? What do you think this time?" "Okay," quietly replied Max, without raising his eyes. That from surprise, the patient would have been ready to jump up, if not for the complete lack of strength and inability to make an extra movement because of the abundance of wires and tubes. I said, "Well," humbly, and just as quietly repeated Max. He was now looking at his wife point blank. If that's the way you want it, then so be it. It can't be. I'm glad. Thank you. You finally heard me. The wife's heart was truly, truly happy, as if her husband had just promised not to kill her, but to give her a new floor-length minx coat or a car. But not right now. I need time to come to terms with it, to prepare well. But we're not going to procrastinate too much, Are my Shogfawi. I want to shorten the duration of my suffering. Max. But I also have to be sure that time is up, that a miracle won't happen. It'll become impossible. Then I can do it, but I will try to overcome myself and do what you ask. Max hated to discuss it terribly. It was even more terrifying to have to do it. But he was giving up, not yet finally, but that there was almost no strength left to fight. How did he reluctantly shave and drag himself by the scruff of his neck? No, it wasn't working. Everything that was happening around him and to him. It was just killing him and not even giving him the slightest chance of escape. Cindy thought, come on, not you, not me. What do you mean? Max didn't understand his wife's train of thought. Let's choose a specific day. A date that will suit both you and me. And both of us will know that this is the last date, that nothing will happen after it, unless something positive happens to change the situation, corrected the spouse. But yes, yeah? Although this backdrop you're asking for is pointless. Okay. Well, I'm in a position where I can't help but make concessions. I'm the one making concessions. Beloved, for the first time today, my husband was smiling. Smiling. Of course, not at all. For it is Cindy who is cunning him. Even now, she doesn't give up trying to wag her tail and guide him. It's good when you want to do that. He couldn't even say those words out loud as he intended to turn her off. In a week, 2 at the most. And that's my minimum. Max cut the bickering short. They agreed on what Max had suggested. Cindy had no choice, no matter how devious she was. Here he stood like a rock, and did not make a step neither to the right nor to the left, threatening that for any trading and manipulation will be thrown a day on top. Of course, Max was expecting a miracle, hoping for one, and it never came. Cindy also added fuel to the fire. Every day, every visit of her husband, she reminded him of his promise. How could anyone forget? This event, together with the chosen date, became the new heroes of his nightmares and horrors. And during the day, he could not stop thinking about it, no matter how hard he tried. Unfortunately, that day came when that unfortunate conversation took place, when he gave up, agreed he'd hoped for a miracle, hoped he wouldn't have to fulfill what he'd promised, believed that in 2 weeks things would change for the better. After all, that's such a long time span. But it was all for nothing. And now what? Now Max had grudgingly acquired the secrets to shutting down his horrifying wife to spare her from daily, unbearable torment. It didn't fit in his head. He was really going to do it. In Max's mind, he realized that he had given his word, that Cindy herself had begged for it. But how? How was it to be done? The confidence was gone.
Was she even there? There was no thought of himself. Yes, Max of course realized that from the point of view of the law, his act was an ordinary murder. And of course he realized that yet perhaps the truth would come out, and he would have to answer for the crime according to the law. But these were completely unimportant trifles. He didn't care about that. He did not feel sorry for himself now or in the future, no matter how it ended. The man felt sorry for the woman he loved, his wife. Her suffering was no comparison to his grief, to those unreal or potential. He had promised her, given his word. How could he not talk himself into it? It was very difficult, even more difficult than he had originally imagined speculatively. Max was walking toward the hospital and was completely immersed in himself, in his thoughts. That's what was in his head in abundance.
He couldn't even hear the sound of his own inner voice, let alone the sounds around him. That was probably why he hadn't heard the man call out to him. Max was walking through the hospital square towards the section of the hospital where his sick wife was. Max sort of heard someone distracting him and calling his name, but not to focus on that. He was too far away in his thoughts to react normally, and only looked back when he felt a light touch on his back. He finally turned around. Max saw in front of him the same gypsy girl, the fortune teller from his dreams, who was always trying to tell him something in his dreams. From surprise, Max even staggered a little. He couldn't believe his eyes. Is it really true? I'm not dreaming. It seemed like a mirage. It was so unrealistic. Could stress and sleep deprivation lead to hallucinations after all? I'm probably just dreaming, or I'm just dreaming about that girl again. His own hunch dawned on him. Max pinching himself to test his theory for sure. But no, other than feeling a little uncomfortable, nothing changed. Maybe. The girl was still standing in front of him, staring straight into his eyes. Her eyes were warm and laughing, watching the man's ambiguous reaction. She was exactly like in his dreams, just like in the movies young, proudly in the most beautifully colored oversized skirts. On her shoulders lay a traditional shawl. Gypsy, without any words, took another step towards Max and found herself in the zone of tactile proximity. Say nothing. She took his palm in her hand, and all doubts fell away. The girl was real. It was real. Are you really real? Max still couldn't believe his eyes. Why didn't you listen to me? I came to you before. I told you. I told you many times. What do you need to do? Why did you force me to come here? The young gypsy woman's voice was still soft, even though she was cursing and angry with him. Though why Max didn't understand yet. I don't remember. I don't remember what you told me. It was just a dream. Stuttering and picking up the words, Max replied, "Come with me over there. There's a bench. No one will see us there." The girl pulled Max with her, and he didn't think of resisting. Her appearance just mesmerized him. He moved as if in a dream, as we were. Sit down and pay attention to me. Listen, you want to save your wife, right? Max didn't even understand the question. He obeyed the order, sat down, and looked at the girl without understanding. The gypsy woman hovered over him, and the meaning of her words could hardly reach him. But what? The stranger asked impatiently. You have been given too many chances as it is. I'll go now. Yes, of course you will. I want to save my wife. I want to save my Cindy. Get off the property. Max, terrified that the girl would in truth remove herself instantly, just as she appeared from nowhere to nowhere. Then, listen. I'm not going to repeat myself carefully. You're being given one last chance. The girl stared fixedly at the man. He only nodded silently, afraid to interrupt her or scare her away. And in another way, right now you must go to one abandoned house. I'll tell you the specific location later while I memorize the gist. You must find a little orphan girl there and help her. After making sure that this was all the gypsy woman had finished, Max dared to ask a clarifying question. How can I help the girl? He asked readily. I don't know that. I don't know it. You yourself must know, and you must help. Then you may know how it will help Cindy? Max inquired. Then God will help you, forgive you, absolve you, and help you. Softly answered the girl fortune teller. I don't understand anything. Boy, there is no need to know and understand. You either trust everything will do or not, but you know what? Then you'll blame yourself for it for the rest of your life. Only God will help Cindy. Everyone else is powerless. That's all Max knew for sure. He knew without the gypsy that no one could help his wife except the higher powers. Whatever you want to call them. Imagine yourself in my shoes. You're just a stranger, distracting me and saying some strange things. Why should I believe you, after all? Max's nerves gave out, and he blurted out everything he thought. Max was sure that the gypsy had a temper and would immediately leave. She didn't. She stood with him with her hands on her hips and looked at him intently, as if she were trying to look into his soul. Her eyes were hidden by some incredible light. It was as if she were smiling with them. Then how do I, for example, know that you are not just going to the hospital to your wife? The girl smiled slyly. I know what's on your mind. Decided, finally talked you into it. And she broke you. You're just following her lead. Turning her off. Suddenly, the gypsy woman raised her voice and even got angry. Max fell into a stupor. He hadn't expected this at all. How could she know that? How did she know? What do you think? How did I know? She grinned, looking at him with a squint of her cunning slanted eyes. New shocks. Max was a little out of it, but he remembered that he hadn't asked that question out loud. He'd asked it to himself. It's all small things. Max, I know a lot of things. Just like I know about the orphan who needs your help right now. All that matters is whether you believe me, whether you go where I send you. Yes, the man could barely get it out of him. In response, the gypsy woman hastily explained to him where to go and disappeared so quickly that it seemed as if she had literally fallen under the ground to look for the girl with her eyes for another minute. Max began to question himself, to think about what had just happened. Now that a few minutes had passed, when the gypsy girl wasn't around. Everything that had happened appeared to be a figment of a sick imagination, a mind game. It couldn't have been real. God, what's happening? I'm a normal, adequate person. I just imagined it all. Max was so shocked at what had happened that he said this rant out loud. There were no answers to the questions, of course. The unhappy, confused husband of Cindy sat alone on a bench at the back of the hospital square and tried to come to his senses. What to do now? Go where she had ordered. Now, of course, that seemed like the complete ramblings of a madman. Max sat there and tried to weigh the pros and cons. After all, what would I have to lose? That was the main question. A sudden thought pierced his head with a sharp pain. Pillar, check your things, your pockets. She was probably just cleaning you out. Otherwise, what was the show for anyway? No, everything was there, Max noted at a loss. Even the cash in his wallet, all his keys, his passes, everything's in place. More weirdness. Huh. In general, it didn't look like this girl was a gypsy, or con artist, or a skillful hypnotist. But I had to check it out too. Now I have no idea what I'm thinking. What was it? Was she even real? Who was she? How did she know the names? And most importantly, how did she know I was coming to help my sick wife die? It's impossible. No one knew. Sure, he and Cindy had talked about it many times, but he knew for sure. They were careful. No one could overhear them on purpose or overhear them. There were more and more questions. But one thing Max realized for sure was that he was unlikely to lose anything substantial if he simply walked to the abandoned house in question. The price of winning is not comparable with the price of losing in this case. So the only way out is to take the risk. Even now, he had no doubt that in a normal and stable state, he would have assessed this story as a delusion. But who doesn't believe in miracles? At the edge of the abyss? Who can resist temptation? But who will? There is simply not a single person on earth like that. Every man will cling to the most hopeless, foolish, last chance with nails and teeth. It's all just a matter of motivation and what's at stake. If it's important, essential to a man, he won't hesitate to jump in head first, especially when what's at stake is what Max had, the life of his nearest, dearest, and dearest. Wasn't that worth the risk? And especially such a small thing, as to seem to someone a fool Max decided was not. And with this thought, he rose from the bench on which the gypsy had sat him, and walked in the direction she had indicated toward the very house where the child was waiting for him. If the girl's words were to be believed, if it was true, that would be a reason in itself to go there and see if it was true. Maix went where he was directed, judging himself and at the same time cherishing hope. There were many different thoughts in his head, but he tried to chase them away from himself, not to hope for anything. Staying cautious was definitely the way to go, though what could have happened to him? If valuables were needed, they might as well have been taken in the deserted hospital square. No one else wanted him. Why? With the accompaniment of these thoughts, Max slowly walked towards the house. Only now more pragmatic and down-to-earth questions began to visit him. How will I find this girl there alone, where she is hating, or will she come out to me? Puzzled, Max moved further and further away. Before he even reached the said house, he heard loud crying. It sounded like a newborn baby crying. But it definitely was. It was the crying of a baby. He didn't just hear it. Following his instincts, Max sped up and headed towards where the sound of a loud baby crying was coming from. The area was quite large, and the terrain was open. It was unclear where to run to. The sound, too, spread through the neighborhood. Even a small Max appeared to be running around the deserted and abandoned courtyards of several old high-rise buildings. Like the last fool, so it seemed to him from the outside anyway. Inner panic and impatience increased the problems, with the already poorly working sound and perception. Finally, Max pulled himself together and stopped, froze, and began to listen carefully. Exactly. Over there, near the second entrance. He was so happy with his guess that he shouted a new idea to himself and ran headlong in the chosen direction. It was only now that the young man realized what had confused him. He did not immediately rush in that direction because there was a natural chaotic dump. It was simply not believable that there could be a child there. And on it, on a mountain of garbage, stood an ordinary cardboard box. In it was a crying baby. There's no way that could be the case. Max absolutely did not expect and even did not allow such a turn of events. He had never imagined that he would have to help such a little girl. When the gypsy woman talked about the orphan girl, for some reason my imagination drew a picture of a girl, of an older age, when the child acts in any meaningful way. When you can talk to him, ask him questions. Finally, ask questions and get at least some meaningful answers. But what to do with a newborn? Max didn't understand much about babies, but judging by the weight and the sight of Kulik, which he was now instinctively clutching to himself, to his chest, it was a very tiny baby girl. It is unlikely that she was born long ago. By the feel of it, she's a few days old. Though Max was afraid to turn it around to examine it carefully. It wouldn't do any good. He's not much of a baby expert, but he's a liar. There was no one around. There was no doubt that the girl was just thrown away, like an unnecessary thing in the trash. But how could the gypsy know about it? It was hardly her own child. The only thing there was no doubt about was how to help the girl. Her answers weren't needed in this situation. He just needed to save her, get her out of this stinking dirty box, which he had already done, and carry her away from here to safety. Max continued to stand with the girl in his arms and looked around in confusion to see if anyone would show up and explain to him what was going on. His hopes were in vain. Max stood and unconsciously roamed a little on the still crying goblet. She was so tiny that Max, in his inexperience, was simply afraid to do anything wrong to hurt the little one. There was no doubt that this was the child the gypsy was talking about. That's why Max had no doubts about the field of the newborn baby in his hands. If it was a girl, it was a girl. It is unlikely that he accidentally found the wrong child in a garbage dump. The horror, the absurdity of the situation, brought Max to uncontrollable laughter. Of course, it wasn't really funny, but apparently, a defense mechanism of the psyche was triggered. In order not to go crazy and not to be touched by reason, sometimes you just need to put emotions outward, into the outside world. Here, the organism found a way out with the help of laughter. Max must have looked like a complete madman from the outside. A man in a decent suit is walking briskly, and in his arms he is holding a newborn baby in a dirty blanket. And the man is walking and laughing to himself and his thoughts. It's horrible. It's chilling. A script for a horror movie. That realization made Max freeze and muffle his part. It's a good idea to stay out of harm's way, or he'd get arrested. And what would he say? That he was walking through the square to the hospitals to disconnect his sick wife from the machines, and a gypsy woman met him, begging to save an orphan child in a garbage dump. His own thoughts again made him laugh uncontrollably at the absurdity and ridiculousness of the situation. Max barely restrained himself from another fit of laughter. Yes, Max, have you had enough? The balls behind the rollers have clearly hit the rollers. Psychosis is visible to the naked eye. Nervous, nervous, nervous. Talking to yourself is not a sign of it either. A healthy and stable psyche. I can't help it. The important thing was that the laughing fit was over. Max was on his way to the hospital. He knew that there was a pediatric ward next to the maternity ward, among other things. So much time had been spent within the walls of that building in different buildings. So many laps had he traveled all over the hospital grounds and the public garden nearby that he knew the hospital like the back of his hand. I'm sure he could give any employee a head start. He couldn't think of anything better to say, and he didn't know what to say yet either. There was only the realization that the little girl needed expert help. He was not even a dilettante, like almost any man of his age, unburdened with children, younger brothers and sisters. He knew very little about children, and even less about such tiny ones. On his own, he couldn't manage what to feed them. Even that would be a problem. Clearly, Max was aware that there was baby formula, but it had to be prepared somehow. All in all, too much wisdom that you only know with experience. Experimenting on a poor, abandoned little girl who had no luck was not at all in Max's plans. So just taking her to his home was out of the question. What's more, a full medical examination was in order. How much time did she spend there? Alone. Yeah, it's warm outside, but what kind of temperatures do kids that age need to be kept at? And then, she could have been starved to death. There were more than enough arguments in favor of the hospital. The gypsy said I should find the orphan girl and help her. I think so. Of course, she didn't specify what kind of help I should give. Cx was hoping that the girl would be at a more capable age and would tell me everything herself. Well, there's no choice. Then we'll figure out what to do next and how to help her. And what can he make of himself? For now, the first is health and satisfaction of basic physiological needs. Exactly so, step by step, without jumping over a step, as Cindy had taught him to do all his life. She was always perfectly able to take her time and not be nervous, to do what she had to do according to the instructions in her head. when Max finally approved before the hospital, had already started blowing his nose. His pacing wasn't as quick as it could have been. He didn't want to hurt the little girl, trip, fall. Feeling so responsible was new to him, so his movements were very stilted as well. Max, with the baby in his arms, immediately went to the right building and tried to open the front door. It failed to close. Bligo had a bell. After about 30 seconds, a young nurse came out. "What's going on, Daddy?" "I'm not a dad. I found a baby on the street, crying. Brought him here." The girl commanded the same from what she heard. Apparently, fortunately, this is not a common situation. What started here ran away, and a lot of people at once. The baby was taken away from Max. Doctors briefly ran to examine her. The nurse who let the man in called the police. Basically, it was a madhouse. Max was told to stay where he was, to sit here, and not to move. They warned him that the police would be talking to him. It was necessary to take a statement because someone had thrown the child into the street. "We had to find this beast and bring him to justice," explained the same nurse.
At first, the doctor came up and hit the right questions. Clarified how long ago the child was found, in what conditions it was in, whether it was crying, and so on. Max answered meticulously and clearly.
He wanted to help from the bottom of his heart, so he did not miss in his story, even the most seemingly unimportant details. As soon as they finished with, the doctor approached a man in civilian clothes and introduced himself. "Hello, senior investigator of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Can you tell me in detail again under what circumstances you found the baby girl? I need to draw up a protocol." Max explained everything in detail once again. Of course, there was no gypsy woman in the story for the Twizzes, sir. Pull out. Your bison. The storyteller decided to omit that nice detail. He said that he was taking a walk, gathering his thoughts to go to his wife. She is seriously ill and went wherever he could under his own thoughts. And then he heard a child crying from the dumpster. Of course, I decided to look, to make sure it wasn't just me. Max didn't know how plausible the story was from the outside. The investigator didn't ask many qualifying questions, mostly just took notes. At the end, he simply asked for a signature and warned that he might be contacted for further details. After the event, Max finally exhaled a little and decided to have at least a coffee at the local vending machine. He was already finishing a disgusting liquid that the machine had given him when he heard someone calling him. "Hello again." A nice young woman in a medical uniform started the conversation. I just wanted to let you know that it's a girl. We've already done a minimal visual inspection. We can say she's fine, out of danger. You did good. You saved her life." "No way." Max started waving me off. That's what anyone would do if they were me. "So it's a girl?" "Yeah, big, pretty girl. She's gonna be fine." "How old is she now?" "Well, how long ago was she born?" "Well, it's hard to say exactly, but it's about a week or so. What's a baby in the corner?" "You probably don't have children of your own, do you?" "Yes," the woman laughed. "Not yet," Max admitted sadly. "I can see her. Would you like me to show her to you?" "May I? It's not fake." Max was happy. He really wanted to look at the girl's face. Maybe she looked like a gypsy girl. That would make sense then, and would explain a lot of things. Not everything, of course, but a lot. He didn't dare to unwrap the dirty blanket himself. He held the girl tightly with both hands. He had heard somewhere that children should hold their heads, so he clung to her so as not to hurt her. And then I was afraid to let go. I even pressed the phone at the hospital with my elbow, just to be safe. But of course, you're her hero. You're definitely allowed, but not in front of you. We put her in the pediatric ICU for good measure, and they have strict visitation rules there. They made Max wear a cap and booties, and even a special disposable robe. They explained that it's necessary for sterility and safety of babies. While they do not have much immunity and they need to be well protected. Here it is. Look, the girl doctor brought Max to one of the quests and showed him with her hand where to look. At first, he was even afraid to look. I noticed that on the tag was written, unknown, and today's date. And already from this, the man's heart clenched even more strongly, even in the nose protected from the sentimental tears received. When finally Max lifted his gaze to the little girl's face, he froze in confusion. This simply could not be. The babe was a carbon copy of Cindy, his wife. The little girl was awake and watched the new visitor with her eyes. He even thought she smiled at him. Max could not stand it. Emotions overwhelmed him completely, and he cried right in front of the doctor. Don't worry about it. You're so touching. You mustn't make yourself so nervous. The girl rushed to him. Come with me. As she led him out of the room, Max realized that from the outside looked very stupid, but he did not care. It seemed that thought were free, that the full meaning of the gypsy's words had only now come to him. The puzzle came together the minute Max saw the little girl's face. How are you feeling? The gypsy girl was still fussing over him. I'm fine, thank you. I'm sorry if I startled you. Oh, it's nothing. If I'd known you were so upset, I wouldn't have taken you there. Don't worry. The girl will be fine. We'll take care of her. And babies like that, especially if they're fully healthy, are good for adoption. Surely she'll go to a good, loving family? No. He said no. What's the big deal? I speak from experience. I'm taking her. Max, he didn't expect that of himself, but he didn't doubt his own statement. Alas. Oh, come on. The doctor seemed even more frightened. It's not worth it, is it? You're under emotional pressure now, and Max interrupted her. He himself did not understand why, but he was telling the girl about himself. Of course, some sire. Some things he omitted, but he said, The most important thing is that his wife is seriously ill, most likely to die. It was found out at the examination when they found out why they can't conceive a baby, and he told of wandering the streets aimlessly, absorbed in his own thoughts. And there's crying. Don't think I'm an infantile and joyful idiot. However, still Max even waved his hand to confirm his words. But I'm sure it's a sign. Take a look at this. Max showed a picture of his wife on his phone. But don't they look like two peas in a pod? I haven't seen many children that age in my life, but I don't think so. No, you're right. A one face, how strange, even several, thought of the girl. You see, even you noticed? Worried Max. In that second, Max knew exactly what he was doing, and he didn't doubt his decision. He didn't hesitate at all, that no matter what was in store for him, no matter what happened to Cindy, he wouldn't be able to leave that little girl. He would take her in. He would be a loving father to her, even if he had to become a single father. I'm sorry. Suddenly it occurred to him, I don't know if it's possible. Maybe he's breaking internal rules. Max, what is it? Be brave enough to ask. Ask directly? What's the big deal? I was going to ask you to take some pictures of the baby. I'd like to show my wife, unless, of course, you're not allowed to. We allow a lot of things around here. You're our hero. The doctor smiled. Give me your phone number. I'll do everything. The girl was gone for quite a long time just to take a few photos. And Max even got worried when he finally saw the girl coming back. Immediately, impatiently asked, in an excited voice, Did something happen? Yes. Yes. There. But not with your girl. Don't worry so much. Who did? Max didn't stop. There's a little girl in there, just born. There's a complication from the birth. She needs a blood transfusion. She's rare, and we don't have much in the way of supplies. What do you nurse? Joyce, but do you need a fourth? Negative? Yes, the girl confirmed with surprise. It's rare to meet a person who knows what it's all about. So maybe I should take it. I've got it right here. Really? You can do it? With hope in her voice, interrogated her. Well, of course. Of course. The happy girl ran away and came back with a questionnaire and some tags. You can fill them out now. That's it. Oh, I'll take blood from your finger. I need to confirm the group identity, the doctor glowed. No problem, but I'm sure. When my wife and I were planning on having a baby, I had tons of blood drawn. I had liters of blood pumped out for tests. By the way, I have a certificate of absence of all kinds of diseases particularly dangerous. If you need it, an almost recent photo will do. I really need it? Let's use it to prove it. We're testing you ourselves, but let it be. You're just the perfect donor. The girl laughed. She was obviously very pleased with the way things had turned out. In general, this whole procedure, along with the blood collection and the nation itself, also took a lot of time. Though Max certainly didn't regret it. It was already quite late. One could say that it was already night when Max was free and could go to the court to his wife. Of course, the reception hours were out of the question. Once again, many thanks to the girl doctor. She arranged for the man to be allowed in after hours. He's a double hero today, she explained to the guard. Saved 2 newborns. How do you keep a hero from seeing his wife? I have to explain why he didn't show up. He was quiet as a mouse. He was very busy. I'm a witness. The guard, fortunately, also entered into the situation, and with sympathy, let him pass on. And on the floor where Cindy was lying, everyone knew him. No one even questioned what he was doing here at this late hour. Max had been here so often that he went to get his boyfriend. When Max walked in, his wife was asleep. He touched her lightly and she opened her eyes instantly. You came after all? I thought I'd chickened out. Cindy resented as much as she could in her condition. To be honest, I didn't expect you to be so sneaky. For as long as I've known you, you've kept your word. She continued her attacks. Cindy, listen to me. Max tried to interrupt his wife's angry tirade, but what can you say for yourself? The woman was indignant, but he could say a lot of things. Max did not even think of inventing something. He simply told everything as it happened in reality, How he wandered through the square with terrible thoughts. How he met a gypsy woman whom he used to see in his dreams.
Told about her prophecy, and how he found a newborn baby in a garbage dump. He did not ignore what had happened in the hospital, and about the interrogation by the police, and about the little girl he had brought to the hospital for examination,
and about the one for whom he had just given blood.
In general, everything without exception or secrecy. Is it really true? Sounds like a load of crap. Cindy could barely find her. What could possibly make that up? There is physical proof about the girls, smiled her husband. First of all, look, they didn't spare me a bandage. After drawing blood, they pumped out half a liter and told me not to remove the bandage. Max demonstrated the bend of the elbow renamed in several layers. Secondly, you want to see a picture of my little find pleased with himself? The man laughed. Of course, you still ask good. That gets to take off show faster. Seeing the little girl on the screen of the phone, Cindy could not come to herself. She looks just like me, exclaimed the wife. As I saw her face, I almost lost my senses. I even cried, Max confessed to his wife. How lovely she is. Just crazy. The woman couldn't get over it. Cindy, you may think me a fool, a nominated lunatic, but I think this baby is a little girl. It's the grace of God, a blessing to you and me. I want to adopt a little girl. Do you think the spouse didn't respond? She just nodded silently. Tears were rolling from her eyes. But the woman still couldn't take her eyes off the screen, admiring her daughter's little girl. Cindy looked at her husband and cried. She just couldn't find any words. Everything suddenly faded into the background, became unimportant. It was out of the question to leave her life spontaneously. It was a terrible thing to even think about. No, the couple now had a hope, a meaning of life together with the baby. Cindy had found something for which she wanted to live on and fight death. It's impossible to describe it, but the hopelessly ill had a changed look in her eyes. She used to look at everything, at the whole world with a vital, dying gaze. Now her eyes glowed from within. There was a real thirst for life in them, and if before Cindy had worn out her spouse to kill her, now her aim had shifted to life, to a whole new life. She'd call Max all the time and ask, "How's it going?" He's on the wall. Max was torn between two departments of the hospital, but surprisingly he had more than enough energy to do it. A huge amount of time was also taken up by running around because of stupid bureaucratic delays. Max was gathering the necessary paperwork to take her home. Turns out it takes a cosmic lot of paperwork to become a guardian, and medical certificates and extracts from the tax office, and the certificate of ownership, and even characteristics. My head was literally spinning from the abundance of documents. And then there is the obligatory point of the school of foster parents. It is good that there are distance learning options. Fortunately, the head doctor of the hospital was on his part to all permissible tricks to leave the girl in the hospital until her fate is finally decided. Yes, and helped Max with documents and requests of the world man. As it turned out, the guardianship was also in favor. After all, Max had saved the girl. One of those women who made decisions on guardianship even said so. "You know, Max, in China, there is such a wisdom. The one who saved another person's life should be responsible for him, because he gave him a new life." The decision on the custody case was unanimous. No one hesitated. There were doubts only because of Cindy's health, of course. But the caring and kind-hearted guardianship officers found a way out. Max would be granted sole custody until there were no new possibilities, of course. In other words, until Cindy made a full recovery. It seemed unbelievable, but that's what was happening. The trends, momentum, and improvement in the woman's health impressed everyone involved. Of course, by that time she had already been written off. It was clearly said that the patient would not leave the hospital. And here's how the miracle turned out. The most real miracle, otherwise you cannot call it. As the great Feina said, if the patient really wants to live, doctors are powerless. That's exactly what happened. And Cindy now wanted to live very badly. She fought death and won in gnawing tooth and nail at the microscopic possibility of a positive outcome. And it began to materialize, despite the seeming impossibility of such an ending. All the medical workers looked at the recently hopelessly ill woman and waved their hands. It was simply incomprehensible. What can I say? A medical phenomenon, 1 in 1,000, if not more. My advice to you, Cindy. Now, don't let your second chance slip through your fingers. Hold on as tight as you can. I will. Thank you. The woman smiled. Neither Max nor his wife had the slightest doubt that, or rather who had given them this very second chance. Foolish or not, to believe or not to believe is a personal matter for everyone. One thing is certain and certain. Happiness. Miracles don't come where they're not expected. And Max begged so desperately for a second chance that it was sent to him from above. He believed it, and no one could convince him otherwise. And Cindy wasn't far behind. They knew the price of their hearse or their happiness and treasured it very much, protecting it from outsiders. By the time the former hopeless patient was finally discharged from the hospital and the entire medical staff, not only her husband, but also her tiny daughter, was waiting for her at home. She couldn't wait to get to her and take her in her arms. The woman wanted to be with her little happiness and miracle more than anything else in the world. As soon as Max first came to her room behind the wall, the woman immediately felt in her heart it was her daughter. Now they with their little family lived amicably and enjoyed life, every moment they lived. They were young, happy, almost healthy. And most importantly, they had Christina, the main gift of their destiny. Cindy now often tells others about her life journey. So what I now know for sure is that you should never give up and give in, no matter how much you want to give up and capitulate. Even if it seems like everything is against you and it can't get any better. Maybe, believe me, the darkest time of day is before dawn. Max, of course, unconditionally agreed with my wife on the conclusions she had drawn. The truths, seemingly banal, are perceived quite differently when you live them yourself, through your own personal experience.